Hey everybody, my name's Cipriana. I'm mainly on Twitter. I'm gonna guess that's how you found this video. But I have a lot of people that ask me about astrology books that I recommend, so I just wanted to talk about some of the ones that I like and some of the ones that I suggest to beginners who are wanting to learn more about astrology, even if you know a little bit, or just haven't really, or just wanting to have, more resources basically. So yeah, I think the first book that I wanted to talk about was Essential Astrology by Amy Herring. So that's one of the books I think I ran into on Scribd or whatever that app / website is called. I like that book a lot. It's a good introduction to modern astrology. I tend to lean towards traditional astrology, but I still think it's a really good resource. If you're new to natal astrology, then I definitely suggest that. She talks about the significations of the signs, the houses, the planets, so the main building blocks of what makes up a natal chart. I think she briefly mentions aspects too, but it's the thing you'll find with a lot of the all-in-one astrology books is that they don't tend to focus a lot on things like aspects or even houses. Some of them will really briefly skim over planet significations too. Most of what you see people talk about is the signs, and the planets are actually what astrology is mainly made up of, but it is what it is. So yeah, she talks about all of the main building blocks. It's a good introduction book. Another good introduction book is Stephen Arroyo's Chart Interpretation Handbook. That's a mouthful. I like that book a lot too. It's kind of similar to how Amy Herring's book is set up too. The only thing I don't like about it though is that he kind of uses the 12-letter alphabet method a little bit, it seems like. At least for some of the significations that he gives for some of the houses. He kind of seems to link like Aries, the first house, Mars, and all that. So I know a lot of modern astrology books do, so it's kind of unrealistic to expect astrology books to not kind of work that in some way, but to kind of prevent that issue of confusing the houses, the signs, and planets, or if you hear me talk about how the 12-letter alphabet isn't reliable, if it's not accurate, and you're wanting to kind of know what I'm talking about or how to distinguish the signs and the houses mainly, it's the main thing, this book, The Houses, Temples of the Sky by Deborah Houlding. I love this book. It's not very big or anything like that at all. I mean, it's a pretty small book. But she goes really into detail about the significations of the houses. So instead of just kind of touching on them a little bit, like, the first house is the self, or the second house is money, and whatever, she actually goes into the traditional, or really I think she goes into different astrologers, different ancient astrologers, significations of the houses, how they approached them and everything, which is really nice. And then she gives the modern ones too, so you can see kind of over time how the houses were developed and everything. She very distinctly, she just distinguishes the houses, what the houses are, apart from the signs, so you can kind of learn to separate the two of them. She also goes over kind of like different theories of the kind of approach where the houses in order represent like the cycle of life, things like that, because there are different ones. Like I think in this book actually she talks about one approach that looks at it as how the planets move through the sky throughout the day. So instead of going from the 1st through the 12th, it goes from the 12th through the 1st. But yeah, just different things like that. But that's a really good book for the houses. If you're wanting to learn how to interpret a chart better, look at how the planets in the houses work, aside from, relying on the signs, I highly recommend that book. Even if you don't, even if you're not really gonna get into like charging for readings or anything like that, or gonna specifically dedicate a lot of your time to studying astrology, then I'd still recommend that book if you're interested in natal astrology, just because it's really helpful. So I think the last like beginner book that I want to recommend is On the Heavenly Spheres by Helena Avelar and Luis Ribeiro. This is a really good introduction to traditional astrology. If you've followed me for really any length of time, you've probably seen me mention traditional astrology. I like it a lot because this book specifically, if you get this book and read it, you'll see why I like it, I think. I mean, I have a big old Gemini stellium, so I like the details. I just like absorbing tons of information, and this has a ton of information. Even though it's not really a big book or anything like that, it has a lot of really useful stuff. It talks about different traditional techniques that were used or still are used a lot of the time. Yeah, I mean, just a lot of traditional stuff in here. If I'm going to recommend one traditional book to kind of introduce traditional astrology, it's going to be this one. The next couple books I won't get into too much, just because they're a little bit more heavy, I guess. They're very, very rich. So this one is called Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice by Demetra George. I love Demetra George. She's not just a traditional astrologer, she has books on modern astrology too. So a lot of people are familiar with her, but this is her most recent book, I believe, and it's actually only book 1 of 2. So she has another one coming that continues off of this. Obviously this book is a lot bigger than the rest of them that I've showed you so far, but this is more of like a workbook, which is nice. She will have a whole chapter talking about a certain technique or concept or anything, or just whatever she's talking about, and then she'll give you pages to work off of practicing with your own chart, so you're not just reading about it and kind of remembering it, hoping you can use it later. She actually gives you specific pages to, let's see if I can find one somewhere around here. It's probably more towards the back. Okay, so like this, for example, she give you a whole page to kind of fill out like just you practicing with the techniques she taught in the previous chapter. So that one's a really good book. It's just a lot more detailed and has 10 times the information that most other astrology books that I've read have. Of course, I have to bring up Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune by Brennan. I'm still working through this one, obviously. That's why I have that piece of paper in it. But I like that book a lot so far. The big difference between the two books that I just talked about is that Hellenistic Astrology by Brennan is has a lot more history in it. I think the first like almost 200 pages is just history alone, just talking about the different eras and different regions that astrology started in and developed in, and how it came to develop as how we know it today. So he talks a lot about that, but also I really like that he has translations of Vedic Valen's significations for the planets, and really for just a whole bunch, like every technique that he talks about in here, there's a translation of some of Vedic Valen's work, which I really like. Vedic Valens was a 2nd century astrologer. That's the Hellenistic period is where we got most of what we know about astrology today. So even modern astrology, if you don't plan on using traditional astrology at all, modern astrology, almost all of it developed from Hellenistic astrology. So if you're going to actually practice astrology, study it, learn it, do readings, write books, whatever you're gonna do, I highly recommend at least reading a couple books on Hellenistic or traditional astrology, just because it's good to know your roots. It's good to know where everything came from, how the first astrologers observed the planets and the motions of everything in the sky to kind of come up with what they mean, basically, like their theories of how they worked, and how to use them and everything. So I highly recommend reading at least on the heavenly spheres. It's the less intimidating book, I think, to read for traditional astrology. I'd at least recommend reading that one. I think the last 3 books I want to mention, well, this one, I just started this one just because it's a required book for one of the courses I'm taking. So I've barely started it, so I don't have a lot to go off of here. But this one's called Horoscope Symbols by Robert Hand. Sorry, somebody texted me. But yeah, so far I like it. I like Robert Hand a lot. He's one of my favorite astrologers. I will probably update you guys on Twitter later about this one, just because I'm not very far into it. So just thought I'd mention that one. Planets in transit. I guess the last 2 books I'm going to talk about are more predictive astrology than natal. Well, I mean, natal astrology is included in these, I guess, just this is more predictive than just the natal charts alone. So Planets in Transit by Robert Hand. A ton of astrologers use this as a reference book. I don't have the attention span to sit through and read all of this, just because literally this book is just interpretations of transiting planets aspecting your natal planets. So it's a lot, and it's not, I mean, it's a good book. It's a good reference to go off of if you're wanting to learn about planets in transit, but it's a hard book to just sit and read because it's just interpretations. It's not teaching you how to work with how to on your own read transits or read a chart. It's just interpretations. Great reference. Hard to read for me because I'm a Gemini moon and I can't just sit and read this whole thing. So I do love that book though. The last one I want to talk about is called The Changing Sky by Forrest. So this book I like a lot too. This is a good introduction to another predictive astrology book. I think this is a better book to start out with instead of just going straight to planets in transit. Or any other predictive astrology books. This one talks about progressions, transits, the different types of progressions, I guess. I think those are the 2 main things that it talks about. Yeah, and how to interpret those things, basically. But this is a good introduction to the 2 of them. If you're comfortable with natal astrology and want to try something different, or if you're wanting to learn more about how astrology isn't static, or your birth chart isn't exactly static, it's not all active at the same time. Different things are activated at different times. The planets continue moving after you're born, obviously. They don't just stay in one spot, so different things over time are going to affect your natal chart. This is a good introduction on how to read that stuff. I think that's everything that I have. I don't think I have a lot of other books, but those are the main ones that I wanted to talk about. I may make a follow-up video about the other books that I have. These are just kind of like all-in-one books, I guess, that I'd recommend. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't think I have anything else to recommend to you guys. But yeah, I don't know if this is gonna be like a one-time thing. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna make other videos or anything like that at all. This is really new to me. I've never made a video before, so thanks for watching. I appreciate it. If you have any suggestions on things you want to hear me talk about, then feel free to mention me and with a recommendation. I'm open to suggestions. So yeah, I think that's all that I have to talk about. I appreciate you guys listening. I appreciate all of your support and everything. yeah, I'll see you maybe next time.